Now, first up, we're going to hear the science behind Green Tree Reservoir renovations from Jason Jackson, or as many of us know him, Buck, and also the conservation status of the Ozark Hellbender from Kelly Irwin. Buck's going to kick things off for us today. Buck really kind of got into his career as a biologist. Started out as a hunter, trapper, and angler at the tender age of 5, and he grew up on a farm in the Delta, a rice and soybean farm, and got exposed to a lot of stuff like a lot of heavy equipment like tractors, dirt pans, dozers, track hoes, and water delivery systems, and that has prepared him well for a lot of the work he does today. He also worked on a catfish farm in his teenage years. And that's where he first started to understand moist soil habitat for waterfowl. And it kind of also spawned his desire to get into a conservation field. And he went to Arkansas State University and earned a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Management and Ecology. And immediately after school, went to work in fisheries. And then came into the wildlife management division, and in 2011 became the statewide wetlands biologist. His knowledge of water management, soil, and construction have prepared him well for many of the problems and unique solutions that are required to do wetlands work. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Buck.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you for the introduction. Okay, just a minute here.
All
right. Are we good to go?
We are good, Buck. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. All right, so we're going to kind of talk about, I guess, what I've been working on for seems like a little over a decade now, but some of it's finally coming to fruition, so we'll get into it. Bottomland hardwoods in Arkansas, pre-settlement, as you see on the left, we had about 8.5 million acres. I mean, a lot of the MAB was had a lot of this bottomland hardwood composition on it. Well, of course, this had some desirable soils underneath, and as man came on board, we needed to clear some of that, or we cleared some of it to start farming. A lot of row crop was integrated into these soils just because they were so good. So the loss of about 6 million acres of bottomland hardwoods was the result. So now kind of paint the picture on why GTRs are so important. Well, in the early 50s, the first Green Tree Reservoir was actually built. It was actually built to irrigate rice, of all things. Well, byproduct of that levee system around a particular tract of woods also had a byproduct of waterfowl habitat in the wintertime. It was actually pretty consistent waterfowl habitat. Well, within a few years of being inundated, the trees started falling out. It was continued inundation. They didn't really dry those things up back then. Well, at the same time, Game and Fish, we kind of actually seen the need to create some GTRs ourselves in the 50s all the way through into the 80s. And what this does is actually provided a lot of waterfowl habitat. Now, when we started back then, what we done was created infrastructure that was really, really great for holding water and not passing water. As you see on this water control structure at Biomeda, it actually does not pass all the water in the slough. If we look down here, the levee system was actually overbuilt, way above full pool capacity. So this starts to change the hydrology for tracts of bottomland hardwoods. We actually closed them down, the systems. Like I mentioned, this is a lot of good byproducts. Some byproduct was the fact that we had a semi-consistent waterfowl hunting opportunity. Little did we know the damage that would occur. So the typical GTR management, as you see on the diagram on the top, is we install the water control structures, and then it would go from 0 to 100%. It depends on the year, since most of them are rain driven, but relatively quick, and then just hit this plateau. And then when we pull the water control structures or the boards out of the gates, or the gates out of the water control structures, they would fall out, and then you would see the actual bouncing of the system the way it should have been, without any infrastructure in place. And you see it's just consecutive every duck season. You see the 3 years there is pretty much the same, which is what we all know Mother Nature does not like, anything consistent. And on the graph on the bottom, you kind of see what really happens in a unlevied or unmanipulated bottomland hardwood community. You see these bounces, and these bounces encourages ducks to utilize the system at different times, different patterns. Whenever we see another peak, they're chasing that fresh water. It moves food around. It explodes another invertebrate population. There's lots of good things about these bounces, and this is what we know Mother Nature was always variable in everything that she does. And that's what we've got to start to mimic. So the water or the inundation of these bottomland hardwoods with levees, none of this ground is perfectly zero grade, perfectly flat. We always have some ridge and swell topography in there. Well, the ridge and swell topography is what really decided which species of trees would be grown where, with or without the levees. As you see here on this illustration, the higher ground is typically where we see the desirable oaks, especially for waterfowl. The more desirable is the areas that have a shorter duration, a little bit shallower, and it's just kind of a little bit more infrequent. Whereas if we progress down the hill, if we had a levee around this system, this would be the site that would be fairly more consistently wetter, and it may be slightly infrequent. And this is where we would start to get into the sure enough overcup zone. An overcup is the only oak that can really retain or have water on it, 9 to 10 months out of the year. Whereas the red oak community just likes little infrequency periods. We progress a little further down the hill, closer to the slough or in the slough, we have cypress and tupelo oak composition. And these are guys that still have to have a dry period, but the dry period can be anywhere from every 5 years to every 10 years, etc. They can actually take a fair bit of water. And the little illustration on the bottom kind of signifies some of that ridge swell topography that I was mentioning earlier. And you see in the swell, like right here in C, we have some trees that do not look too happy, too healthy, and that goes into thinking about a GTR and how we actually drain this swell and how we can actually improve that lack of a bed. All right, so some of the impacts from long-term management on GTRs, like I kind of mentioned earlier, when we put up levees and called water control structure features, they change hydrology. Even though we may think that some of these were big enough, it still retained water and it still impacted trees. So here you can quickly see the water line on these two red oaks. You can see how consistent it is. There's some basal swelling involved here, but more importantly, this tree, he has bark sloughing, so it is a tree that is irreparable. So if we're seeing all these stressors, the site is already too wet. So when this tree falls out, which it is on its way out, it will be replaced by something more water tolerant, which will likely not be a desirable tree in that particular site. Maybe a locust, overcup, it can be a variety of wetter species there. From a wildlife management standpoint, it's hard to go in and introduce any wildlife stand improvement practices in here due to this our closed system type structures that's making the sites wetter. We have to really think about the water as the actual management tool and how we can work with that. Here we have a diagram that Greta had drafted a few years ago, or grew a few years ago. This is a willow oak in the summertime. And here you'll notice that starting at the top, we have the crown dieback. And whenever a tree is not putting any new shoots on, that's one of the first uh-ohs that we need to really be kind of catching. Well, if you're on a thick forest and you're on the bottom, you can't really see the tip the crown dieback, but you can see the tip dieback if you're looking up. Well, you start seeing the tip dieback, and then you may see these larger dead limbs, and these are really large dead limbs. These aren't the pruner limbs that are down kind of in the subcanopy. So when you start seeing this, and then you see the bark sloughing again, coupled in with the basal swelling. Basal swelling is one that is one of the first characteristics that a lot of people can see. Obviously, you can see this any time of year. Granted, the water's not over the top of it, but bark sloughing and the basal area can kind of help you understand that, okay, we do have some serious issues going on. Well, if we progress down, of course, you can't really see this unless you get really creative on extracting some roots, but the roots are dying as the tip and the crown dieback are going on. Well, as he's losing anything up here, he's losing it down in the ground. What this does is pushes this tree. You kind of see the root system on these, they're shallow rooters on these red oaks. And as he becomes narrower and narrower, we're asking him, instead of standing on his foot, actually stand on his tippy toe. And then what happens whenever we have a wind, any kind of a wind event, we get a wind-thrown tree at that point. You also see some of the leaners in the background. These are just identifiers that the system is telling us some major issues are going on. So why are we concerned about red oaks? Besides the maps that one of our contractors have worked on, potential native vegetation maps on identifying where species should be, what species should be where, the red oaks are the ones that actually feed a lot of wildlife. They're small enough actually to feed a lot of wildlife. Now, overcups, they account for less than 10% of mass that goes into are utilized by ducks. As you see, the Nuttall and willow oak are two of the primaries really that we have that are consumed by ducks. All right, so the long-term commitment on GTR renovations or modifications are really to encourage the red oaks to be in their proper zone. Again, referring back to the potential native vegetation maps, where they used to be, adjusting the water in those GTRs will encourage that, which will also maintain and or make a sustainable forest. And sustainable forest is what is actually going to be able to provide enough food for various wildlife. Not just mass, but also invertebrates. And as we can go on, hopefully we can do a lot of BA reduction, basal area reduction in these systems to actually promote just a little bit of more soil type plants that historically would have been there. Of course, making these changes, being a avid duck hunter myself, it's also about the long-term commitment on still providing some waterfowl hunting opportunity. Without drastic changes, without some changes, we may not be able to provide what we all want. So we'll talk about one that we've been working on for several years now. Henry Gray Hurricane Lake, which is just east of Thursday, as you see here. It kind of sets the White Rivers on the east side of this thing. White River extends all the way up into the southern side of Missouri, and the Little Red River, it actually runs up into north central Arkansas. So Henry Gray Hurricane Lake is it's at the confluence of those two rivers. So it gets a fair bit of water. So here we're looking at a LIDAR map, which is, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with LIDAR now, but it's basically a bunch of lasers shot out of an airplane at 5,000 feet. What it does is turn around and builds us a topographic survey, if you will, of these bottomlands. This is something that normally we can't do any other means. We do add in actual topographic surveys in places to ground truth the LIDAR, but this is most cost effective and best way to obtain this kind of information. As you can see here, here's a White River. It's kind of meandering around in the Little Reds on the south side, Devil's Elbow, and this is the Little Red River. So you see that there's the confluence of the two. So you can kind of see some of these scars that run through here. It's actually a Glades Creek proper that runs through, and then here's Cutoff Creek. They both come whenever the river gets up to around 23, 24 foot at Augusta. These systems are engaged, and these they kind of function like a bio. They actually move water from the White River, runs all the way through the GTR, through the WMA, down back into the river system. So we had to look at the amount of inputs. This helped drive us to where to start looking at what activates what is engaged at what X elevations. So LIDAR is the first really big piece of the puzzle. Here we'll see a little zoomed in version of the LIDAR. Here's Glades Creek, Squirrel Lake. Glades Creek structure out here. Particular pay attention to Mud Pond Slough, which is site number 5. And site number 6 is Honey Lake right here. These two we've done a lot of modifications up and down on the South GTR. This actually completed last December. I'll show you those here in a bit, but even on this LIDAR, you can see all the little drainages and or splays that come in and out of the river, where the river historically would have wanted to go and push water into whenever there's a big event on the Little Red, but also areas that would actually drain the heart of the GTR. This is also the heart of the area where we had a lot of the damage, and a lot of it is due to the lack of being able to pass enough water through the system. We measured for inputs into the system and what we had to do to recreate and or push that through as outputs. So also on this, just note that the green area in a little higher elevation, the way this reads, it's not the best because the significantly higher ridge on the west side here, it kind of messed my colors up a little bit. So here's some of the topographic information, and this is Glades Creek. If you remember, it's up there beside Squirrel Lake. I showed you just a minute ago on that LIDAR. Glades Creek is where we dropped into several years ago to try to devise a water control structure, that would actually be able to handle the inputs that comes in from the White River and actually pass through and go through the actual historic Glades Creek channel. Now, back in the 70s, the way to do this was to actually build a structure offset. That way you could actually logistically get it in the ground. There's fair bit of concrete, fair bit of steel involved here. Unfortunately, on this one, we elevated the invert or the floor of the structure up higher than the actual floor of Glades Creek proper. So it actually functions as a little bit of a weir at about an 8-foot difference there. So it does not become engaged until this has got at least 8 foot of water in it, and then it pushes back, and then it starts to flow through and to Squirrel Lake and out to the river. This structure, as you can see, is quite small. It's only about 40 feet wide. It cannot handle and or pass the inputs coming through. In 2018, I installed one 48-inch pipe to assist with the drainage while we got some more information, while we gathered a lot more information. We also introduced a USGS water gauge down here, water level and velocity gauge down here, so we can kind of understand, have a track record on what's going on and how to just use that information moving forward. Here is a histogram from that gauge. It just kind of shows you a little bit of the bouncing. Now, granted, this was put in 17, so you know, there's a little bit of bouncing that's in there, but again, the water control structures was have been open for the last few years. So in 2017, we changed the flood up regime on a lot of all of our GTRs in the state, mainly to buy the trees some more time, so we could actually get a lot of this engineering, a lot of this down on some kind of paper. So here we'll see, this is the Glaze Creek structure that we're actually going to put in hopefully this year. Here you see this is a lot different style than anybody's accustomed to, actually. We're blazing the path on putting a lot of overshots in GTRs, is this kind of a single leaf overshot gate. So this gate actually lays down whenever we don't want to retain any water, but all the debris and water is going over the top of it, hence the term overshot. So this has infinite control. It's not just go put in a 6 or 8 inch board and water's going to come up. If we want to mimic any kind of bouncing, it's literally a push of a button and it will adjust there. Of course, you see the solar panels on there. This one will be set up with automation to where we can actually adjust it accordingly and react with inputs being changed. Along with that, you'll see the historic way that we built levees, 3-to-1 or even all the way down to a 1-to-1. Our idea was to build them with track or dredge and then pile them up on top of each other. And what this does is creates that levee. If you remember from that earlier slide, it makes a levee, a berm inside this GTR, and it cuts off sheet flow, so water can't actually come across here whenever we have a big water event. Even though full pool or full service level is right here, we have 2 or 3 foot sticking out. I believe this is a huge hindrance, and of course it's a lot of maintenance for field staff to go back and patch levees and fix constantly. So we're cutting sheet flow off across these bottomland hardwoods, which is what always existed and what really helps with keeping oxygen on young seedlings. Keeps these next generation of trees coming. And here we kind of see a 10-to-1 size slope levee. And you see it looks a lot flatter because it is. But what we would be, or what we're going to try to mimic is, or try to install, is a levee that has a full service level of a couple of tenths over full pool. That way it does not take much of a rain event at all, and the whole levee becomes the structure, not just the actual water control structure that you see. Everything is engaged, thus making the sheet flow happen across the system again. So this is some pictures from Site 5. If you remember on that LiDAR map I showed you earlier, this is Site 5 and kind of in the center, Mud Pond Slough structure. This old historic structure had gates on the front end. This is tearing the structure out, and then the bridge going in over the hose. So what we've done is actually went upstream and surveyed a lot of the actual historic Mud Pond Slough and tried to replicate that down here to get it to about the proper width and the pass as much water as what we believe it historically would have. So in this case, this structure here adds about 11 times more water passing through, coming from the north to the south out to the little red is behind us in this picture. Here's a structure here's a picture that I took out of the airplane, you'll see that it is definitely full pull, or bank to bank full, and passing the Little Red River's down here on the right. It's flowing north south, and this picture here shows that a lot better. It's one thanks to Scotty. Grab this. It really shows the amount of volume that actually needs to be passing through these structures. And again, this is Site 5, one of the predominant discharge sites for the South GTR. So here's Site 6. Site 6 had a 4-foot screw gate in it. It's a Honey Lake structure. So that screw gate, you can see it. It's right there. Now, all the things left is a pipe. So the slough come in from the right, and it was actually cut off the road because, again, back in the day, it was easier to actually install the water control structure on this side, and then excavate this ditch out and actually make this slough go cut the water into your water control structure. Now times have definitely changed, and we have done the same thing. We replaced a bridge going across here and open it wide open to where that water actually has a better shot. We're not slowing it down by asking it to make a 90 and turn around and make another 90. Impeding all this water actually trapped a lot of sediment within our sloughs, which also makes our sites wetter. So without having the capabilities of actually putting these structures on the actual historic floor of the sloughs, we're always adding more water to the system. So here, this will actually blow all this, some of this loose sediment out that's on top, actually get some of that drain to be cut back behind us and encourage the system to bend back. Here's the water control structure in the dry. Again, I grabbed this out of the airplane. Why it's kind of fuzzy, but the old pipe was right here, and that slough kind of hooked in like this, and then it went around. And here is one thing Scotty he grabbed while they were there. Matter of fact, he's probably the one on the bridge. But here he is in the web. So we do all this, and we also have to address some of the sloughs within the South GTR. 2019 mulched about 9 miles of drainages, opened them up to where that water will start readdressing those old historic sloughs. And since it was so wet, we got some amphibious mini-X's involved and cleaned a bunch of the system up, and now it is starting to really function pretty great. So now the next step on just Hurricane is Glades Creek structure, and then hopefully we can drop in there and start doing some wildlife stand improvements. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Buck. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? I got one quick one. I don't see any in the comments, but you talked about measuring inputs, like coming off the white from like Glades Creek and Cutoff Creek. How did you do that?
So, of course, I recruited USGS, since they've got a longer history of waters than anybody in the world. Well, the United States anyway. So got with those guys. We put some gauges out in there, got some cross-sectional data of Glades Creek, Cutoff Creek, and attacked it from that way. It was a lot of, it was about a year worth of collecting cross-sectional information, because these sloughs are always changing. You know, the floor is always changing, so the volumes are always changing, and try to draw an average basically. But yes, we that's how we determined that about 10,000 CFS comes into the WMA through those two sloughs, and that's how much we need to be able to pass. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Cool. Interesting stuff. All right. Thanks, Buck. We appreciate it. Anybody got any questions before we move on? All right. Our next presenter is Kelly Irwin. If you don't know, he is our herpetologist at Game and Fish. Much like Buck, Kelly kind of got caught the bug for conservation, and his desire to become a biologist early on in life, chasing bullfrogs and water snakes and snapping turtles in the creek near his home in northeast Kansas. That interest in amphibians and reptiles continued into adulthood, and he eventually obtained a master's in wildlife and fishery sciences from Texas A&M University and began his career with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission in 2000 as actually our agency's very first herpetologist. He has done a lot over the last 2 decades plus. In his capacity as our herpetologist, he instigated and wrote the first Game and Fish Wildlife Pocket Guide series on the snakes of Arkansas. He conducted and coordinated a multi-year project to obtain approval from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to start the first alligator sport hunt in Arkansas. He is the co-discoverer and co-author of the description of one of the rarest animals in North America, the Ouachita streambed salamander. He also initiated and wrote regulations to separate commercial harvest of aquatic turtles from commercial fishing. He remains actively engaged in various capacities, regulatory, public information, and management activities on amphibians and reptiles, and ranging from the conservation of the 130 plus native species to oversight of commercial harvest and farming of turtles and alligators and non-native captive amphibians and reptile species. And he is also the guy who introduced me to Ozark Hellbenders on the 11 Point River a number of years ago. Kelly, looking forward to hearing this presentation about the conservation status of Ozark Hellbenders.
Thank you, Trey. Get this open. There we go.
Looking good, Kelly. We got it.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Thanks for attending, everyone. Today, I would like to share with you a little bit of the status of the Ozark Hellbender, of what we've done historically and where we are today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Ozark Hellbender, it's our largest aquatic salamander, or excuse me, one of our largest. They can grow upwards of 24 inches in length. Our largest animals used to occur in the Spring River. On average size, they usually top 22 to 24 inches in length on a regular basis. Their closest rival is a swamp-dwelling amphibian or salamander called the Amphiuma, which do not share these habitats such as this. This is what we would consider to be prime Ozark Hellbender habitat. Hellbenders in general inhabit in clear, fast-flowing, or cool water rivers and streams, with the presence of large rocks, such as shown here. These are used as daytime cover for the animals, as well as sites for egg laying and rearing of the eggs and young, providing them cover, as well as forage sites for their primary food, which is crayfish. This is a site in Arkansas here that illustrates one of the sites. It's not too illustrative of that rocky cover, but we see a shoal here that is made of rock structure that the animals would use in that nice, well-oxygenated water. And just upstream of this fast-flowing water is a deep water site where most of our sites average from 3 to 10 feet in depth, where we have rocky outcrops on the outside bend waves of our stream, in particular the 11 Point River. To give you an idea of their distribution, historically, the hellbender, of which there are considered to be 2 subspecies currently, the eastern hellbender, which is widespread throughout the Appalachian ranges and into as far south and east as the northeastern corner of Mississippi, and scattered historic records from Ohio to southern Illinois and into those drainages that drain into the Missouri River of central Missouri. The Ozark hellbender is a subspecies that is considered that occurs only in the Ozarkian drainages, predominated by Current River on the east, the 11 Point River, the Spring River in northeastern Arkansas, which is formed by Amanda Spring, and then the North Fork of the White River and Bryant Creek, which flow into the upper reaches of Norfolk Reservoir. Historically, we assume that the hellbenders occurred well down into Arkansas in that North Fork of the White River basin prior to the construction of the large reservoir system that occurred there. This map shows the counties in northeastern Arkansas, in particular up in the right-hand corner in Randolph County, illustrates the 11-Point River, and those dots, the chain of red dots, are localities where we found the Ozark Hellbender. Then to the left of that, over in Fulton, is the Spring River, which historically harbored a large and stable population. And then the three scattered dots along the White River, and then one over in the Black River in northern Jackson County. Those are based on historical records, which we have not found any recent validation of animals occurring there. Now, you've heard me say it historically in reference to the Spring River. And this is because this is my friend Sunil Okada, who many of you may have seen on National Geographic or Discovery television show channels, where he and his wife have been shown handling and manipulating the Japanese giant salamander. He's been working with that species there for over 20 years as well. He came to visit Arkansas, and I hosted him here on his honeymoon. And we went up to the Spring River, and this was in 2003 at the fish hatchery. And the staff there were shut off the overflow on the dam. And when they do that, the animals would come out from underneath the Greyhound weirs there behind the Sumio there on your right, and also would crawl out from underneath the large rocks there. Historically, when they would do a drawdown, they could find over a half a dozen animals, I'm told. But nowadays, when we do this, no animals will show up. And 2003 was the last time I actually observed an Ozark Hellbender in the Spring River. Two graduate students did survey the river from 2004 through 2006. They found a total of 12 animals. Historically, just downstream of the Spring River hatchery back in the early to mid 80s, they could still find 35 to 40 Ozark Hellbenders under rocks in that stream channel there, just a little ways, a few hundred meters downstream of the hatchery. Since 2006, though, after 3 years of surveying, they found a total of 12. We have not seen any animals since then. Unfortunately, I tend to consider this population to be functionally extirpated, which leads us to the only remaining population, which I mentioned, illustrated there, was the 11-Point River. In 2005, I began the monitoring program there, just to see what and how our population would be faring. I took the data that was shared with me from a graduate student who did his research there from 2000 to 2004 and built upon that information where we had 243 tagged individuals that produced information on our sex ratios as well as recaptured data, and also established some information about some metrics on our mean number of individuals that we would observe during our survey. Well, to survey the 11-Point River, most folks would consider, well, to work in 3 to 10 feet of water, you're going to need a scuba tank. Well, scuba tanks don't work well in the river because of the speed of the current. It's like wearing a sail on your back. It buffets you around. You expend a lot of energy and oxygen to maintain your breathing in that condition. So we use what we call a hookah dive system. It's a static airline. We can puff and puff very hard all day long on one tank of gas. We also don't have to carry 2 tons worth of air cylinders, which if we worked 4 to 5 different sites in one day, I would have had to pack 4 to 5 cylinders per person per site or for one day, and that weighs a lot. So the airline with 45 pounds of dive weight harness puts you down on the bottom, and you can sit and focus on your work, flipping the large rocks to find the hellbender. Again, historically, when we were doing a survey from 05 to 14, we were capturing the animals to process them. So we get the standard metrics, we weigh them, we measure them, you measure the total length, and then what we call the snout bent length, which is the distance from the tip of the snout to the posterior edge of the vent or cloaca, which is illustrated here as an adult male. These is in the late summer when they start to express what we call secondary sexual characteristics, which is the enlarged ring around the cloaca. My colleagues euphemistically refer to this as the donut. Breeding males become much more enlarged with the donuts, particularly as breeding season advances, and they breed in early to mid-October. And so it helps, is beneficial for us to obtain sexual identification in late summer when we did our survey work in July or August based on this period. Also, too, we would take tissue swabs. This was to recover cells for later genetic analysis to determine if the presence of the amphibian chytrid fungal disease was present or not. We did get positive returns on this. Chytrid is present in the Ozark Hellbender populations. Data are inconclusive as to whether they cause actual mortality, but I will show you some other situations, though, that have been related to the presence of chytrid fungal disease. This is the amphibian disease that is found worldwide and has caused extinctions and or severe declines in amphibians in seemingly pristine areas around the world, from the cloud forests of Central America and South American Andean mountain ranges to the highland tropical rainforest systems of Queensland, Australia. The jury is still out as to how high and where this disease has become so prevalent and has led to such severe declines. Also, we would mark the individual animals with a pit tag. This is the same little rice grain-sized structure that you inject in under the skin. They use these on your pets, for your cats, dogs, and racing horses, etc. Same system, so that we can, upon recapture, keep and track and maintain data tracking for the same individual over the years. Obviously, then we can scan and look at that animal and really positively ID that animal in subsequent capture. This illustrates some basic information, though. Females grow larger than males. They're the light blue frequency bars there. Obviously, if you have a sample size of the duration of time in which we collected this data, it illustrates a nice, what we like to say in the science, a bell curve, or normally distributed size class. That would suggest a healthy population. However, I didn't have time to break this down on an annual survey basis, which would probably illustrate, be a very different picture if I had a graph for each separate here. But again, this illustrates the sexual dimorphism in that females grow larger than males, so they can produce and carry lots of eggs. I should say that in that regard, females fertilization is external in hellbenders, just like fish have external fertilization. This recapture data that was compiled up through 2014 and built upon the database that a graduate student in Wheeler started in 2000, and I picked up the reins in 05. As you can see, I have a few captures on the far right-hand side here that illustrate you're having recapture data from 7 to 13 years post-market. Hellbenders, even though no one has unequivocally studied and tracked the same animal for multi-decades, it's conjectured that these animals can live upwards of 50 plus years, but no one researcher has confirmed this yet. Hellbenders are very phyllopatric, I should say, too. That means that they stay and live in a confined home range and don't move a lot. if at all. Hence, those animals that I illustrated in that graph there, more than likely were found in the exact same location where they had originally been tagged a decade before. So when we did those surveys between 05 and 14, we did these every other year. About the time I quit in 14, though, I had shifted it from 2011 to 14. We were going to start doing it every third year. And in 2014, after consulting with my colleague and the Missouri State Herpetologist, Jeff Brigler, we felt like our annual disturbance or biennial disturbance, excuse me, of the rock structure, that habitat is so critical for their existence, coupled with the handling of the animals to extract and obtain the data, growth data, and capture information, was too stressful, both for the habitat and for the animals, given the fact they do have chytrid fungal disease presence, and these would be additional stressors. So we stopped the biennial and, for that matter, regular disturbance of the habitat survey for animals. This table shows our observations or catch per unit effort. This is a metric that we can use to at least get some relative measure. It's not hard, accurate, but a relative measure of the abundance of animals in your population. What this means is that you are quantifying the number of hours that you per person hour searching divided by the number of hellbenders. Or excuse me, hellbenders divided by the number of search hours. So what you wind up with is number of hellbenders per person hour of search. So we started out in 05 at 1.1 and maintained that level through 09. For all intents and purposes, we were averaging 1 animal. By 2011, we dropped to a half of an animal in 1 hour per person. And yet, if you'll notice, our search time increased, and yet our total number of survey sites remained the same. So the last 2 years, 11 and 14, those numbers were basically the same. After our nest box maintenance work last summer yielded no animals in the nest boxes, which we just normally do, and I'll speak to more on this. We just decided that we would go out after 7 years and disturb the habitat to see how many animals we could find. Unfortunately, after spending almost 23 or 24 person hours of search time at 12 sites, we were only able to find 3 individuals, which yielded a bender per person hour of 0.1, which was not good. So the trend lines are obviously going down. In 2011, and my colleague in Missouri started working with and toying with building artificial habitat structures. I'll call them nest boxes because that was a primary intent. This is, we call them the boot. This long tunnel-like structure, and then a chamber in the center. And what you'll see on top of the center there is a lid which can lift off for access. We install these in the riverbed and weigh them down and make large rock piles on top of them to hold them in place with the throat pointed downstream so the animals can access them and hopefully come in and feel like they have a happy little free home, either hang out in general and or to also lay their eggs, which is our primary goal to help enhance that habitat. And I'm going to say more to that in a minute. So in 2012, we installed 39 nest boxes. These were the first boxes that we had built and installed in the 11 Point River. We checked those in October, which we had 6 animals occupying boxes, and 1 of those boxes had a clutch of eggs. I was very pleased. We were in about 10 feet of water, and we lifted the lid. You can see the arrow underneath my head there, pointing at the eggs in the nest box. That was the same year, in the first year, that the St. Louis Zoo, which is a collaborator with Missouri Department of Conservation and AGFC, in having captive breeding program and head starting facility. Their animals, they had 3 distinct raceways, one for each different river system. They had a Current River, 11-Point River, and North Fork of the White River system raceways. And all 3 of their breeding populations in the zoo actually produced tons of eggs, and they were swamped, so we couldn't take any eggs from the Arkansas segment of the 11-Point River. So Jeff was very pleased as well. Here are the eggs at approximately stage 20 in October of 2012. Water temperature at that time wasn't too bad. It was probably about 63. We went back in November. We pulled the lid and observed about 12 larvae. We assumed that many of them were up under the lip. This is the bottom of the box that you can see here with the gravel being the backfill around it, and the larvae probably had access to go hide up underneath the bottom of that box. But then when we returned in January 2013, we counted about 140 larvae at a water temperature of 48 degrees. For those of you who stood in a trout stream below the outflow of Bull Shoals or North Fork, the water temperatures are 58 degrees. Without the advent of having a dry suit, my hands become non-functional at 48 degrees pretty quickly, as my colleagues and coworkers here can attest to. Needless to say, the male was still in the tendon, as all villagers do. He was still hanging around there in January, but unfortunately in February and March, we had high water levels and we were not able to ascertain the ultimate fate of these animals. However, you can see here by January, they had well-developed gills and well-developed forelegs were prominent. So we were very, very happy about that. We also made ecological observations during our time frame of regular surveys. As I mentioned before, hellbenders are very what we call phyllotatric. That means they're very means to love the location, Patrick, or origin, or place of origin. That means they don't move a lot. And yet, we have recorded 3 different long distance movements based on our recaptured data during this time frame. Our longest was a kilometer where a male moved downstream. The female moved almost as far upstream, and we found them both at the same location. The next movement was a lot shorter, so only 150 meters. Additionally, too, we made the observation on feeding ecology. As I said previously, though, kingfish make up almost 90% of the hellbender's regular diet. I caught this large male and we put him in a shoebox as a temporary holding pen before I would work him up. And while he was up there on board, we had a wet pillowcase. That's what we put our clean and sterilized pillowcases for each individual animal. But he was covered and shaded and put off to the side away out from under foot. But we came back to the top after finishing up the survey, and he had regurgitated a mud puppy. So if you ate a big giant pile, think of if you were able to swallow 16% of your body mass in one meal, that's a very significant large food item. But this is the first record of mud puppies in the diet of the Ozark hellbender. There are issues that our population faces there in the 11-Point River, but not all of these issues are only found there. The primary issue is habitat degradation and or loss, and this occurs in our stream systems throughout the state of Arkansas, throughout the country, and the whole of the United States. That is caused by erosion. What we see here in this first photo, you see the deep green colored water, but then the gray or the brown gravels and sands in the background there. That is a loose layer of unconsolidated gravel and sand that is 3 to 4 feet deep, and it was deposited there by the creek that is the confluence there in the background on the left, that dark area and the gravel bars. So that high water event dumped that loose gravel and sediment into the 11-point channel here, and then the next high water event, that loose sediment will be blown downstream, which in turn will fall out and deposit and cover all those nice big pretty flat rocks like we saw at the beginning of the presentation. Well, that habitat loss we call it smothering. They just effectively that sediment smothers it. When you have no stream bank forest and tree line, but what we call riparian forest, which holds that stream bank in place. If it gets cleared or if it gets eroded and all the trees get washed in eventually, then this is a significant addition to these large loose sediment loads that are a significant problem, not only to our hellbenders and mud puppies and huge rocks, but also when you have stable long-term substrates that are also home to many of our most endangered and threatened species of all of our taxon groups in the state, and that is our freshwater mussels. They can be smothered as well. And our colleague here, my malacologist, Kendall Moles, and Bill Posey, who's our previous malacologist, can attest to many instances of our loss of threatened and endangered mussels due to this smothering effect. So sedimentation is significant, and habitat restoration is very much needed to help a variety of our aquatic species. But just another example of the deep cut and erosion forces. County roads have been purported to add significant loads of sediment to our rivers and streams based on Nature Conservancy studies. Another illustration of these, just the cloudy fines flowing into a nice clear water, historically clear Ozarkian stream. Since 2007, we've had some amazingly severe flooding events. I'm aware of one in 2007. This shows a segment of the 11-point river near Dalton. On the left is a normal flow. Sorry, these aren't larger images, but you can kind of make out where the normal channel is. And then in 2011, you see all the gray-brown areas where the stream waters have left the channels and gone into sheet flow and filled all of the old distributary channels throughout that floodplain. That was a very significant event. This not only exacerbates and accelerates those bluff bank stream conditions and erosion, as well as tributary inputs, because you imagine all the water that washed in to produce this high water event in this system. So very much additive. Petco is a chicken processing plant that built a new plant at Pocahontas, which is our base of operations. We've been told there were approximately 100 new chicken house operations built within the 11-point river basin. But you can see this is a construction footprint of the new chicken house. And there's a stream basin right down here at the bottom. This was on a hill there flattening, as this is one we drive by on a regular basis. But without silt fences or sedimentation capture, you can see that this would be a readily available source to get those tributary inputs. Another issue is livestock direct access. Our stream team coordinators have done an outstanding job. The best they've got a lot of places to work on. The proverbial Dutch bay with all 10 fingers and toes in a dike fit that's made of Swiss cheese and trying to stave the issue. But when you have cattle that can access some streamways directly, not only can they come stand in the water and dump their organic wastes directly into the water, creating increased bacterial loading, which leads to increased nutrients, which grow algae mats and other aquatic vegetation, but they also then can trample and cause accelerated erosion on those riparian strips that we so much need to hold those soils in place for erosion. The other side to animal and agricultural activities is also with the advent of increased numbers of chicken houses. They also then will spread that chicken litter waste on the pasturage adjacent to the rivers and streams in that watershed. And if they are spread out in a near time frame, just prior to a major rainfall event, a lot of that nutrient loading can in turn be washed into these riverine systems as well. Again, exacerbating that nutrient load. So not only do we have habitat issues, but the animals themselves, the hellbenders, have expressed these disease issues. As I mentioned, they have chytrid fungal disease is present, but the jury is still out as to what causes this condition. Does the chytrid fungus, which breaks down keratin. Keratin is what makes your fingernails and hair. Does it allow the invasion after breaking down the keratin in the palms of the feet and the tips of the toes? Does that allow the invasion of bacteria that then create a flesh-eating condition? Here we see a large eroded palm. Then you can have ulcerations of not only the palm of the foot, but also the tips of the toes become inflamed and raw. We lose the bones in the toe. We found individuals that have had this enlarged or bulbous toe tip, as I call them, condition with the ulcerated tissue and with the bare bone, the phalange or toe bone. Just picture it sticking out from, say, one of the tips of those toes there. So it still had the bone, but no longer had any tissue surrounding it. And this is additive over time. Each year, I believe, you can see the kind of whiteness in this picture here on the palm. I feel like these are like healed lesions or ulcerations. So it's a time series problem that slowly grows over time. So you started with the previous one, and you wind up over time, you can get feet that look like this. Total and complete digit and foot loss. I found one male who had no feet at all, and all four limbs looked like this. And we don't know what to do about that condition, unfortunately. Our conservation efforts consist of maintenance of our nest boxes. We're still hoping to get some eggs to send to the St. Louis Zoo for their head starting program, even though they have captive breeding as well with dedicated raceways there. It's easier almost to obtain wild eggs that have been fertilized naturally and grow them out for 4 to 5 years. As we did in 2017, we released 113 animals that were 4 and 5-year-olds, and we released those at 4 sites. We went back last year, and we took, we have what we call the wand, which is a reader that we use that's attached to a long cable that we can take underwater, the wand head, and the reader stays on top side. And we scanned all the rocky habitat that we could find where we released animals, and even in some sites where we had previously marked resident animals with pit tags. But we were only able to get one hit, and that was from a head-started hellbender that was released in 2017. Unfortunately, it expressed the loss of terminal phalange on its digits, and also had expressed the inflamed and ulcerated toe tips. So we know for a fact that after 4 years, animals will succumb to this. Even though it looked healthy otherwise and it had definitely grown, we did not hang on to the animal to extend its stressing by making all the other standard metric measurements. But I gave it a brief examination and promptly returned it back to the cover well. Ongoing stream team projects to help conserve and restore streamside habitat are critically needed as well. It is very helpful to we have Stephen O'Neill, our stream team coordinator in that region. It's been almost 10 years ago. He did a great project with a cooperative landowner where they did rock veins, and which I'll show you in a minute. in alternative water sources, and did a presentation with the local Cattlemen's Association in hopes we could get some more buy-in from other landowners, but unfortunately, I'm not aware that any of them do. This is just to re-emphasize here our decline in our observations per unit effort based on our survey time. I don't know what else, not much you can say, considering to give you a relatively historical perspective there, though. Back in the early to mid 80s, though, they were finding 8.5 hellbenders per person per hour in the 11-Point River at 2 different sites in Missouri. And then back to stream habitat restoration efforts can help reduce the sediment load, fencing up the cattle out of the river proper and providing them with alternative water sources such as solar powered water pump stock tanks can greatly reduce the scours in the cows, and they actually have been shown if you provide them with alternative water where they cannot get in the water and cannot defecate in the water, they actually put on more weight than if they are drinking that water that is contaminated with E. coli. So it's a very important step, I think, in educating our cattlemen. They can actually improve their cattle earnings by increasing the weight on that livestock by making these changes. So this is a juvenile that was found some years ago, which we have not seen in quite some time. And I'd like to think there is some hope for the future if we can get lucky and still get some eggs. We're going to play the shell game and move our boxes around again this year, which is fairly labor intensive. By the time you unstack a lot of rock and bring the boxes up and haul them to a different site and then reinstall them, it's a real team effort. And I would like to thank all the people that have helped over the years. The game and fish staff, folks at Greer's Ferry National Fish Hatchery who kindly built boxes, our colleagues at the Ecological Field Service Office who helped us do field work, my colleague Jeff Brigler and Missouri Department of Conservation, and the St. Louis Zoo. And this is, sometimes you find fun things when you're diving in the 11-Point River like this alligator snapping turtle, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time. I can remember how to get on. There we go. Massage.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. Does anyone have any questions to follow up with? See, Kenny Jones. Yeah, jump on in, Kenny. What have you got?
So I was trying my best to pay attention, but I may have missed it. What has caused the foot loss and the phalanx damage? Do we have any kind of idea?
They had a correlation. I worked with some researchers from the University of Tennessee. They've not shown definitively that digit and foot loss is direct cause of that loss.
Okay.
They didn't find a correlation between body size and the presence of BD and related to the digit loss.
Okay.
But they haven't made a direct connection scientifically. They've not been able to do so.
Okay, and one more thing. What about the possibility of investigating the dermal microbiome of those specimens and figuring out what kind of bacteria that may be harboring that can cause infection?
There have been some studies done in Missouri, and also I think in Indiana. There's such an incredible breadth of, sorry about the noise and exhaust muscles out here, incredible breadth of diversity of bacteria, I'm told, that it would require a very extensive research project to actually be able to drill down on that, to answer your question.
Gotcha. Well, I do know someone that has a lot of dermal microbiome experience and metabarcoding DNA and things like that. So,
Okay. Well, Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, we're at a juncture now where we can't hardly find animals.
Yes, sir.
That's the challenge, and moreover, we're trying to minimize that stress, I should say. I do appreciate that question. I would like to think maybe that some of those questions might be answerable based on use or studies done on populations where they have more animals available, I should say.
Yes, sir.
But thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, it looks like that's going to wrap us up. Thank you, Buck, and thank you, Kelly. Both great presentations about really important topics of interest to Arkansans and to our staff. thanks everybody for joining, and we will see you next month for the April version of the Wild Science webinar. Take care, everybody.